Okay, I think we are good to go and make a start. I don't know if everyone is still hearing the music or not. I think I still am. Bethany, is that music still running for everyone, or are we good to go? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Right, welcome everyone to the third and final webinar series of 2024. We, as I've said, we've scheduled a couple up to this point, and again, you know, we've had some really good attendance numbers, and we really appreciate that. And the plan then going forward into 2025, as I'll run through shortly, is to complete a further set of webinars throughout the year that will hopefully just provide some useful insights into various things in the world, in and around what we do here at COMET. So again, just for those of you that don't know me, that are joining, my name's Craig Smith. I'm Head of Operations and L&D here at COMET. And yeah, delighted to run through today's webinar, which of course is focused around advanced data gathering skills, techniques, and the likes. Now, if there's something here at COMET that we should be able to say that with some confidence that we're experts in the field at. I don't like using that word too flippantly, but if we are, then I would imagine it's certainly in the aspect of conducting investigations. So yeah, really looking forward to running through this one for you today. And again, if there's anything at all on today's webinar that we touch on or we make reference to that you would like to know a little bit more about, or you'd feel you'd get a little bit of added value by reaching out to us, then we're more than happy to have follow-up conversations, of course, with any of you, as we always would do, of course. Just to give you a little bit of an insight then, before we kick off for today's webinar in our chosen topic, I did promise on the last one, which was at the tail end of November, and that was to do with understanding human error within the world of our investigations. I did mention there that we would be hopefully soon finalizing our webinar series for 2025. And it looks like we've done that now as well. So pretty much finalized and locked in for the time being. So hopefully some of those dates and indeed topics will be of interest to you. You'll probably be glad to know that I won't be running all the webinars next year. You can hear from other people that are a tad more interesting than me, and on a couple of those, we're hoping to run them in conjunction with some of our close friends and allies and partners as well. So yeah, hopefully you'll look forward to them. But we've got some hopefully some useful and interesting topics coming up for you in the next 12 months or so, as you can see there. So again, just keep your eye on the lookout for those coming through our usual social channels, and you'll be able to start signing up for them relatively early into the new year. So there we are. That's what we've got planned anyway. Okay, the plan for today, of course, and today's objectives, if we can cover these off, that'll be fantastic. We're going to start off by looking at the benefits of effective investigation data gathering. So why do we do it the way we do it? What are the benefits? And we'll begin to touch on some of the kind of initial considerations and techniques that we ought to think about. If we think about the importance of a timeline of our investigation, then certain things must take priority over other things and so on. So we'll go into some of the detail around that. We'll talk as well about investigator biases. So what are some of the things that as investigators can help us or can actually be detrimental to the outputs of our investigation? So we'll look at some of the very easy pitfalls or some of the assumptions that we can often make, and some of those kind of predetermined views that we may not realize that we have, but actually we do, and perhaps that might have an impact on the outcomes or the quality of our investigation. So we'll touch on those as well. And then we'll close out by covering off, at a fairly high level, those kind of best practice investigation techniques. And again, the audience that we're expecting here, I appreciate that most of you are coming from a world where you are familiar with and are kind of hopefully using COMET. but we have had quite a few registrants from the world out with COMET. So again, a lot of what we'll talk about will be fairly generalized from that sense. But I will close out today by talking about something very specific within the COMET tool called COMET's Expert Extensions that do allow for consistency of initial data gathering throughout the lifetime of your investigations. So I'll touch on that from a very specific COMET perspective as well. So that's the plan for the next 45, 50 minutes or so. Again, folks, as you'll hopefully see, there is, of course, a comments panel. And as we run through it today, if you have any comments, questions about what I'm running through, by all means, pop a question in the chat box. If I can't pick it up in live time, then I'll certainly pick it up at the end of the session as well. And again, I'll stay online for a few minutes once we actually close out. If anyone has any burning questions or you want to have a chat about something, I'm more than happy to do that as well. Okay, let's go ahead, kick off then. Let's take a look at the benefits of why we should be gathering good data. Let's kind of set the scene a little bit and sort of lay some of those early foundations. Well, I'm not going to run through all of this, word for word, but you could make some, I suppose, some fairly obvious reasoning yourself as to why it's important that, individually, yes, but at an organizational level, that we do conduct, good quality investigations. And, the very obvious things are, it's what you put into it is typically what you'll get out of it. So anyone who has been through specific COMET training, with myself or indeed others in the team, you will have heard us talking about that practice of whatever you put into it, you will get out of it. Good in, good out, poor in, poor out. So if we think about our investigations as a process and we think about the outcomes that are generated that we try and build actions on to prevent a reoccurrence of that incident, then of course we can't expect to do that without making some effort to understand what actually happened. So there's this transition period in an investigation where we first of all need to establish the facts, and that's what happened. In the world of COMET, of course, that's known as the discovery phase. And then we move on to why it happened. And of course, in COMET, that's the analyze phase. And I think our very first webinar we ran at the beginning of November talked about the importance and how to go about a proper root cause analysis. So this is what feeds that process. This is what feeds that machine. And if we don't have a consistent way of doing it, if people, investigators, responders on the ground don't know those key steps to go through and what they should be looking for early, then there's going to be a stronger possibility that our outcomes perhaps won't be quite as reliable as they could be. And of course, that might have an impact on our future, improvement strategies and things that we put in place as well. So, it goes without saying, accurate analysis, good input data provides a solid foundation, as I've just said, for properly understanding the root causes. I'm talking to those of you now that are very much from within that COMET world. The COMET root cause structure. That the root cause analysis stage works through communication, operating environment, management, equipment, and training. There is a series of questions that you are going to be asked within that process that you've got to answer. If you are unable to answer those questions, yes or no, with ultimately fact-based information, not just our assumptions, which we'll come on to shortly, but without fact-based information, then of course you're going to struggle to get to probably all of the right root causes. So the more informed, input data we have, the much easier it's going to be. And that's what we mean by that second one. We can make informed decision-making with proper information at our disposal, as opposed to trying to make assumptions and come to a conclusion about how we can prevent something from happening again if we haven't gone to enough to understand why that is. So I always think about it from the perspective of this. If I am responsible for an investigation and investigation outputs, and I put my name to a final report with root causes and actions, and what you are essentially saying with those actions is, this is what's going to prevent reoccurrence of this event going forward, or as best we can. How do you know that's going to be the case? What justification level have you got? And all of that has got to tie back at some point in time to what you found out during the investigation, the discovery phase. What link or what thread have you got to say, well, actually, this happened because of this, and by preventing this again, then that should give us a better chance of preventing that reoccurrence. So you've got to have that connection between what happened, why it happened, and how we actually fix it going forward. There must be a theme, there must be a set of connections in there. And if you don't have that, then we've probably gone off course a little bit, and we're now beginning to introduce third-party elements or things like our opinions and assumptions and biases that perhaps maybe aren't quite as fact-led as possible. So accurate analysis, goes without saying, helps us make informed decisions, of course. And all of that pulled together should ultimately, lead to us becoming much better at learning and improving from the outcomes of these investigations. And whether that's processes, whether it's training, whether all these things go together and contribute, of course, toward our overall culture, it's those insights that we get of those investigations that are really, really important. Now, a lot of this I have already said. I probably covered a lot of this in our very first webinar. But the point being, this information doesn't come out of thin air. It doesn't magic itself. You have to go and do a little bit of the groundwork and go through some key steps, which we'll introduce to you later on today, of course, about what those key steps and techniques look like. But it's really important that these are some of our reasons why. So if we needed no validation or motivation to do good investigations, then well, I'm hopeful that this certainly provides that initial why, and that's really important, I think, as well. As we go into it. So let's not lose sight of what we're actually looking to achieve. Of course, we've got to take a realistic view to these things. There will be operational demands. Some information might be very difficult to gather, but if we don't at least try, then you'll never know. So quality in, quality out, of course, is a very obvious reason why we do this. A little bit of information here, and I'll kind of run through these, relatively sharpish for us. But if we think about this from the outset, what does good information, what does good data gathering actually look like? So what are some of those sort of key things that we should be looking to try and establish during the course of our investigation? Well, first and foremost, without making it overly complicated, consider a range of sources. Don't rely on one source of information. So what do I mean by that? Well, a source of information might be a witness, it might be a human being. A source of information might be a document, a piece of physical information that we have. It might be physical evidence or information that we captured in the immediate aftermath, the scene of an incident. It might be to do with the outcomes, of a piece of equipment that's been used and analyzed. So we have various sources of data or information, if you like, that we can look to capture and understand the whole picture about what went on. So again, consider all of those sources available to you that are available at at those locations, at that site. It won't always necessarily be the case, but don't just rely on one piece of information. Don't just rely on some initial accounts on witnesses. Don't just rely on documentation that you've provided with and make that assumption that it's all accurate and correct, because it might not be. So you have to think with a critical mind. You have to think about things from very much an analytical and evaluation perspective. How things may appear might not necessarily be how they actually are. So how critically do you actually view the information that you're capturing as part of an investigation? And yes, we'll touch on some of those investigated attributes shortly. And as you know, very much from a COMET perspective, we obviously talk about the importance of using a timeline. That gives you a really good, effective way of organizing your data that you're gathering, particularly if you're investigating something quite significant. A lot of what I'm talking about here, of course, is scalable. If it's something lower level, you might not need the same level of effort. If it's something more significant or the potential to be higher, you'll require a lot more effort. So it is a lot of this, of course, folks, is scalable. But nevertheless, timelining the information that you have, organizing it in such a way that it becomes easier to understand what happened, who's involved, when, how, where, why, all of these important things. We can organize that via timeline, of course, in COMET. That's our SID grid tool that will help you do that. Accuracy and precision, as I've began to touch on a little bit, think about the data that you're actually capturing in terms of its accuracy, in terms of its authenticity. Do we have to review that information? How valid actually is it for the investigation that we're gathering? Try and capture things, as quickly as possible. It's the sort of classic mantra that, if you don't capture something now and you later realize that it was relevant, or you might have, you wish you'd spoken to that individual, you wish you'd captured that document, or whatever it might have been. The longer time goes on, the less chance of that information being readily available to you. So how quickly we respond and capture information, I'm not, this is not CSI with, white suits and dusting for fingerprints and the kind of golden hour. It's not quite as extreme as that, obviously, but there is a necessity to how quickly we're able to actually respond and get the investigation underway, to capturing the right witnesses and who they actually are, as it says there. Let's not introduce potential kind of memory fade into things, and even just the actual outcomes in the immediate aftermath of an incident scene location. That will change dramatically, post-incident. So let's make sure and be across that and capture it as much as possible. So how quickly we're able to respond efficiently and effectively, of course, can have a big impact on the quality of your investigations. Be objective. Be objective as well. Again, we're trying to capture as much, of course, fact-based information as possible anyway, to try and have very much an objective view on what we're gathering. So try and avoid those biases or assumptions that might creep in. Let's try and make the process and the information and their outputs, as least subjective as possible. So let's try and take a step back and create this picture that's balanced and fair, as best we can. And we often get asked this within training as well, that we're delivering. What about teamwork? How should we be building our investigation teams? Well, there is no absolute right or wrong way to do it in our experience. However, again, if we are investigating something of significance, let's say, and it might take us a few days or even a few weeks to kind of get to the bottom of it all, then you're going to have to rely on a team. It cannot be down to just one or two people. So yes, leadership within a team is important, to protect the team, to make sure they have the time and the resources to do the job that they need to. So effective leadership and effective terms of reference is really important, but also the makeup and the skill set within the team. So who are your subject matter experts that are available? Who are the people that know the process that you're following? So do you have that kind of COMET expert, for example, in the team that knows the process really well? Who's best placed to go and speak to witnesses and capture information there? Do you have somebody independent, somebody who doesn't know much about what happened, doesn't know much about the incident, and can maybe ask those, silly questions that actually then make us realize, oh, we hadn't thought of that. If you're so ingrained and detailed in something, if your investigation team is only made up of those people that know the ins and outs of what happened here, you're missing perhaps the bigger picture. So having that fresh set of eyes to come in and ask those questions around the edges, only takes one good question, and it's amazing what might come out of that as well. That's quite often the role that we play as external investigation provider. We quite often get asked to come in and support an organization from a third party perspective. Well, we're not going to be subject matter experts in everything that you do as a business within your chosen industry. But what we can do is come in and provide expertise around the process, but of course, ask those questions that you might not be seeing because you're so in the detail or in the weeds, so to speak, of what it is you actually do. And you have to have that, but having that little bit of a kind of step back, fresh pair of eyes. So, really do think about a well-balanced team and how that's actually going to work day to day as well. And the final thing to summarize a lot of that, before we move on and start looking at this through more the lens of the investigators themselves, always think about your barriers, controls, and changes. Barrier and change evaluation, the review of the effectiveness. As we've said, incidents, as I've already said, rarely, if ever, occur due to a single issue, a single failure or problem. It is usually an accumulation of a number of things that have gone wrong, often in their own right, not that significant potentially, or on their own, they're not that significant, but when you put them together, these become more increasingly significant contributing factors. So if we've had an incident, something hasn't gone to plan. Either the planning hasn't been correct, or thereafter something hasn't gone to plan. So where are the holes? Where are the gaps? Where are the shortfalls within the actual planning and the execution of the work in terms of how we've controlled it? But even a little bit less formal than that, and this is a piece of advice I give all of the investigators that I train, think about what changed. Ask the question, what was different or what changed today or at any point in time in the planning or the execution in the lead up to the activity or the work that caused the incident. Because if we've done something 100 times successfully before, then today something has changed. And quite often that sort of control barrier review and change review, these go hand in hand. Sometimes they might give us similar feedback. Sometimes we might learn something new, but never be scared to ask that question. What's changed? What was different today? Because I can guarantee you that something will be different. Something won't be right. Either that change wasn't recognized properly and dealt with, it wasn't identified, or actually it was, but it wasn't seen as something critical, and the team perhaps found a way to navigate their way through it, and perhaps that didn't have a desired outcome. Okay, so that's really just some fairly general advice, guidance, I suppose, around why and of course how to conduct a good quality investigation. We'll kind of move on now, and we'll start to look at some of the detail of some of these things and the intricacies. But if nothing else, hopefully there's one or two things in there that you'll see is valuable for your own investigations going forward. And even if this is you, of course, having a conversation with a colleague or passing on the information, then hopefully you found that relatively useful as well. So that just sets the scene a little bit, I suppose, for why we're here and talking about these important things today. What are some of the some of the risks, I suppose, with not capturing the right data? What might, of course, go wrong there then? Well, to summarize what we've just said, opportunity loss, as I've said, without accurate data input, the chance to identify those proper improvement opportunities, of course, are going to be limited. So let's make sure that we capture the right people, get the right data, and truly try and understand from an objective stance what took place. Of course, inaccurate analysis, the root cause is either incorrect or we haven't captured all of the correct ones. Therefore, we're missing an opportunity for improvement there. Reoccurrence, again, if we're not able to do that, the chances are that issue or incident will happen again at some stage, whether it's on your site, asset location, whether it's elsewhere, the chances are it will happen. So the whole point is to try and prevent reoccurrence and learn. So of course that's a risk here if we don't do it properly. And as well, loss of credibility in what we're doing as well. As it says there, stakeholders and everyone involved, if we're not good at a site level, at a leadership level, at an organizational level, if we're not good at investigating, if we don't take it seriously, if we don't place enough emphasis on the outcomes and why we ought to really improve going forward and try and prevent reoccurrence, and we let things slip and we let things go and we have these repeat incidents, we lose credibility, we lose faith. The culture probably won't end up being quite what it should be. And people then become skeptical of the process in future. And that can be a very difficult place to actually recover from. So that's something to really think about as well. Take each one seriously and give ourselves the best chance. Okay, so let's be mindful then of the characteristics of what good data gathering looks like, as we've just said, and let's try not to fall into the trap of any of these points above as well. Okay. Right, so that sets the scene a little bit. What I'd like to now is spend a few minutes talking about us as humans, beings, but also as investigators, because that's that's ultimately what we are, isn't it, when we do an investigation? And it's not often, the challenge often is, as I've mentioned, with the kind of teamwork, the actual investigation team piece, is that it's not our day job, right? It's not. We all have our main job, our main role. We get asked to lead or become involved in an investigation. Day 1, day 2, it's priority. Day 3, it starts to kind of wane off a little bit, and by the end of the week, we're kind of back doing our day job and we're just touching base with the team. So it's difficult, right? It is difficult. These things are a challenge. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes exploring that side of things and some of the things that we can do to try and be better investigators and think about, and also things to try and avoid as well when it comes to our own approach, mindset biases that might creep in and ultimately adversely affect the outcome of our investigation. So we've pulled together some personal qualities that we think a good investigator should have. And to be honest with you, we could probably have added another 8, 10, 12. There's probably quite a lot you could add to this. Some of these you may disagree with. But if we just worked from the top and kind of worked around anti-clockwise, open-minded, absolutely. Let's be open-minded. What does that actually mean? Well, it means not jumping to conclusions. It means not just relying on our experiences to tell us what we think might have happened. It's about being open-minded and saying, you know what, there's a good chance we're going to learn something new here. There's a good chance somebody else is going to bring a level of expertise, investigation, and maybe I don't have all the answers. So I'm going to speak to this witness with an open mind, and I'm really not going to jump to conclusions, or I'm going to approach the outcomes of this investigation as I really don't know what the outcomes are going to be until we get there. I'm going to let the investigation lead those outcomes, not the other way around. I.e., I'm not going to go into this with a preconception of what I think is the answer and then try and find my evidence to back that up. I'll come on to that shortly. We're going to go in there with a completely open mind, and that's really important. Decisive decision making, yeah, absolutely. At some point in time, we have to progress, we have to move on, and sometimes we've just got to kind of stick our kind of flag to the mast, so to speak, and say this is what we are going with. Sometimes you will not get all of the answers. Investigations can be challenging, and there might be occasions or times where actually, no matter, as it says there, no matter how tenacious you've been, and you're not just accepting a single answer as the right answer and digging a little bit deeper, sometimes you won't always get to the outcomes that you think is right, or even necessarily you haven't got an access to a source, a witness, a piece of information that you really like to, and you have to just draw a line in the sand and move on. That is just the nature of the beast sometimes with investigations. So we have to be decisive. We have to know when to move on. And as I said, they're tenacious. Yes, absolutely. Let's not just, let's just not stop at the first hurdle or the first challenge that presents itself. But sometimes, we do have to just move on. And of course, being neutral, I touched on that a little bit earlier on as well, about taking a very much an objective view on things and taking a step back a little bit and not showing favoritism or favorship to one particular outcome or finding, than another. And again, all these things probably seem obvious. Actually, you look at that and think, well, yeah, obviously an investigator should be open-minded and should be observant and all the rest of it. But actually, in reality, it's a bit more difficult than that. So again, these are important things to think about. So yeah, let's so again, neutral and balanced. Let's not show favoritism as much. Let's be led by the evidence, not the other way around. Observant, yeah, again, absolutely. Witness interviewing, picking up on what people say, picking up on what people don't say. And that's the other thing. Interviewing is a skill. Gathering information is a skill that's to be learned. It's not rocket science, but it's a skill. And often it's it's the things that are not coming out in the wash. It's the things that witnesses are not saying that might be an answer. Why is that person not speaking about that? Or why do people know less about that situation than the other? Why is that? So often it's not just what people are telling you, but it's what people aren't telling you. How do you observe that kind of information? How do you capture that? How does your mind let you critique and evaluate what you're being told? Being curious, asking questions, absolutely. I think being curious and asking the right questions is actually a true sign of intelligence. It's not necessarily having the answers or having the information all the time, but it's about knowing the right questions to ask. There's a good sign that you're a good investigator. It's an intelligent way to go about it. Being ethical, of course. What does that mean? Well, let's not lead our witnesses unnecessarily. Let's not present a falsified view of a situation to a witness in order for them to disclose certain information, which then turns out to be incorrect. You're compromising your own reputation there. It's not the right way to go about it. So let's be ethical in how we actually go about and deal with people. And of course, let's be diplomatic as well. Let's not, ultimately there should be nothing, personal about our investigation or outcomes. We are there to do a job, and let's do it as professionally and fairly as possible. So hopefully we wouldn't disagree with this, as I'm sure that you're all sitting there thinking about, Craig, I would add that and I would add that. We could probably have a whole discussion today on the personal qualities of an investigator, but these are the sort of 8 things that we picked out that we think if you're generally speaking in line with these, then you won't go too far wrong. So just some common, I suppose, mindset barriers that we can often see investigators sort of getting into or kind of falling into the trap with, that we try our best, to avoid. So that initial control bias. But how could this have happened? We had the right procedures and policies and risk assessments and permits. So how is that? How has this been able to happen? I touched on an outcome bias and the benefit of hindsight during our human error webinar, of course, last time around, where we spoke about it's easy in an investigation with the benefit of hindsight to say, well, they clearly shouldn't have done that, or that was an obvious opportunity to have, made a better decision, or to stop the job, or to do whatever, looking at the outcome. But at that point in time, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, or the team didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And, often the benefit of hindsight, yes, we can use that, but, let's not use that in a negative way against those that were actually involved in the event itself. So again, these little kind of barriers can often prevent us, properly and fairly getting to the right outcome. The Peltzman effect, we've trained them, we've given them the right equipment, they've got the right procedures and the tools. How could this have happened? Well, for those of you that are not aware, principally the Peltzman effect talks about, certainly in the world of, if we take it to the world of health and safety culture, is that the more protected people feel, so the more PPE, the more controls, the more things we have in place, a human being can kind of get that kind of superhuman complex, and actually that then means they take more risk, ironically. So although because they feel protected, they actually, because there's more things in place to stop them from getting hurt, that then actually increases the chances of riskier behavior. So it almost cancels each other out. So the Peltzman effect is something to think about as well during your investigations. But again, did that or could that have had an effect potentially on those that were doing the involved in the work or the task at the time? Again, escalation bias. This incident happened because they didn't stop the job. There were so many opportunities. Well, again, let's not unfairly, use that against those involved at the time. As I say, the chances are they thought what they were doing at the time was correct and was the right decision, and they were doing the right thing to do a good job. As we said, it's quite rare that people will intentionally do things to break rules, knowing that the chances are the outcome is going to be bad or negative. So again, let's try and avoid that kind of escalation outcome-based thinking too much. I want to know who's responsible. The fundamental attribution effect or bias. Of course, well, that's where we get too focused on the who was involved and less about the situation, the circumstances. It can be very, very easy to jump to that. Well, who did it? Who was involved? I want to know who was at fault, who was responsible. Yeah, people will be involved. People probably have made mistakes and errors and lapses of judgment or poor decision making. But again, there will have been reasons why. Quite often, other circumstances, influences that led to that decision or led to that mistake or that mindset at the time. So let's start there. Let's not jump to conclusions here and jump to that sort of person responsible. Let's not fall into that trap either, because that doesn't help anyone, and it certainly doesn't help those involved that we are trying to get useful information from. So let's think about that. And the final one to think about is, as we've touched on briefly, we think the cause of the incident is an outcome, X, Y, or Z. And because of that, because we think the outcome is this, we then go away and essentially find information or favor information that we gather that supports our outcome, our confirmation bias. So you've essentially decided on what you think the outcome is likely going to be, and either consciously or subconsciously, you end up sticking with and gathering information that ultimately supports that view. And maybe you end up inadvertently discarding other information that may be relevant, but because it doesn't necessarily support your view, you perhaps think it's not relevant. So of course you don't then gather it, you don't add it to your timeline. It then doesn't have a role to play in the root cause analysis and action items. So again, don't get caught in that trap of thinking too far down the road and coming up with a solution and then finding the evidence to fit. It's easy done. It is easy done. And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust your instincts. I'm not saying that your experience doesn't play a role. Of course it does. I would actually encourage you to follow that instinct and that experience. But whatever the outcome is, it must be led by the facts and the circumstances of the incident. Don't just find facts and circumstances to support that bias that you might have. So yeah, just some common mindset barriers, approaches that us as investigators might have. And again, there might be something useful in there for you, of course, to think about as well. Now, this is an interesting one. Well, I find it interesting. You may or you may not, of course, but the perspective of what an organization might see as how we do work. Okay, so this is like how we do work from an expected place versus how we do work, or how we expect work to be done, versus how it's actually done and what actually takes place day to day. So in an ideal world, we operate in a pretty straightforward manner. We have a task, we do the work, we complete the work, we do all in a fairly planned, orthodox manner. Nothing really goes wrong too much. We're not ever in a risky situation. And the boundaries of unsafe work we never really touch on, and we tend to complete tasks safely. That's typically how we plan for work. We try and mitigate the chances of it becoming unsafe and risk becoming involved. But actually, if our perspective is, well, that's how work is done, well, then that's how we are going to go and investigate it. We're going to go and look at those barriers and controls, and we're going to look at it through the lens of, yeah, but that's how it should have been done. So that's what we're going to investigate against. Well, that's okay, and that's okay as a starting point. However, our perspective should also allow us to think about the alternative, which is something like this. So again, from our viewpoint as an investigator, we should also be thinking about, okay, that's maybe how things are planned, and that's maybe how things ought to have been done, and maybe sometimes things do go like that, but more often than not, they probably don't. And actually, the reality of how work is done is probably more like this, where you know, it often will touch on that safe work, linear approach. But actually, we probably do the majority of our work in a state where, you know, there is risk, and we know that, and we carry that risk, but we deal with it, and we deal with it usually pretty well. And we might sometimes get uncomfortably close to it being unsafe, but maybe we do take that risk, or maybe we do use our experience and workers and, you know, effective operators. We sort of get round that a little bit, and ultimately we still get a successful outcome. But if we were to sit and evaluate that work with or without an incident, let's take that from the context of without an incident. If we were to sit and actually evaluate all the work that we do you think the reality would be that? Or do you think the reality would be that? I would hazard a guess that in the majority of cases, the reality would be this. So therefore, when it comes to investigating where an incident has gone wrong, let's not presume that it's a one-off. Let's not presume that, oh, you know, of all the successful days we've had, the work must have been like that. And the day we had an incident, the work must have been like that. That's not the reality. The reality is probably it's always like that. And we probably do get close to those touch points of unsafe work more than we think. What I'm touching on here, folks, is a lot of context and theory and research has been done in the world of learning teams, in the world of organization, human and organizational performance factors. So it's important that we think about that in the context of what's real here. And the chances are, you know, when we've had an incident, it's not the first time it's happened. It's not the first time we did work like that. That's actually become quite normalized. But on the day of the incident, you know, it didn't quite go to plan. We were able to navigate it safely. Okay, so it's think about it through the context of this is quite normalized behavior now. So how do we actually try and, you know, continue to mitigate it, but through the lens of a practical, realistic approach, not what we think is perfect, because that's probably pretty unlikely that's actually happening. It's far more likely to be something like this, where things fluctuate and it's not always perfect, but we get away with it. But guess what? We do work successfully. We don't have an incident. There's no near misses. We kind of get through it. Do we ever review that if the outcome is successful? You know, maybe we do. And if we are, great. But, you know, we probably don't. Not really. Not as in depth as we would if something has gone wrong, of course. So let's perhaps think about that as well. So a good way to do that actually is introduce that concept of work review, perhaps to a learning team. So you can review things that have gone well, you can review things that have not gone well. And it's amazing what you will learn in an open culture where you have those conversations about, okay, we did a task successfully today, really good job. Let's talk through what we actually did. I bet you a lot of this type of activity will actually have happened, and things will have fluctuated quite a lot, and it wouldn't have been a perfect story like that. So again, something to think about as well. Don't just think that we had an incident, this is the one day it's gone wrong. It probably isn't. It's just the one day that it's said that it's really hurt us. So again, a little bit of perspective to think about there as well. Okay, so again, I just wanted to spend, sort of 10, 15 minutes there focusing the attention, back on us. I've said there's probably enough in that one session alone to do an entire section on this. but we don't have time for that. I want to talk about a little bit more than just ourselves. But these are some common biases or mindset barriers that we might have to try and overcome during an investigation. And again, folks, to try and put this into context, to be as scalable as possible. Yes, it's good practice to get into routine of all these things, but these will particularly play a role, of course, in a lot of these things I've mentioned already. In those higher level, more significant events, then these things are probably ultra critical. I would encourage you to consider all of these things all the time, but they're probably ultra critical on those kind of higher level cases as well. Particularly when you've got a whole team involved, and you've got different perspectives, personalities, dynamics. All of this stuff then becomes all the more important, particularly from a team leadership perspective as well. So to close out today's session, we're going to talk in just a little bit more detail in a kind of practical sense about some best practice techniques that you can take away and hopefully pass on to others as well. Now, again, this very much is a lot of this, what I've pulled together here. We actually do go into some of the detail on this. We do run some advanced investigation techniques training through COMET, and some of what I've got here to show you is actually from that very material. So it's really relevant stuff that you'll hopefully find useful. And again, none of it rocket science, folks, but things that we should be thinking about as takeaways. So again, if we talk about the prioritization of evidence gathering in that linear sort of timeline reaction to an incident, we have to probably prioritize three things. The actual physical scene or location of the incident, okay? Well, we need to capture that, okay? So what's changed? Come back to that's what's changed. What was relevant at the time of when the incident took place? How was the scene and the environment on the immediate lead up to it? And how was it in the immediate aftermath? Did things change? Did things move? What does the situation look like? So that quick response is critical to this, as we spoke about earlier on. But it's really important that we establish and we capture that initial situation and circumstances at the scene as best we can. Also important, that ties hand in hand with that, is preserving physical evidence. Okay, that might be PPE. It will likely be equipment, materials, components that we'll be working with, the actual physical environment that we're in. Is there anything physical that we need to actually capture and log and take possession of? We should be capturing that as early as possible as well. We really ought to be working off a consistent checklist when we do this to make sure that we don't actually miss anything. Let's not leave it to chance. And what's really important is the capturing of initial accounts, which I'll touch on shortly. But what we're saying here, folks, at a high level is let's make sure that we capture the people that were there, that were involved, whether it's the planning, the execution, the aftermath. Who are those people that are going to be able to directly help us out? Early identification is key. That might seem obvious and it might seem easy, but it's not. People move away. People step back from the limelight. People don't want to be associated necessarily. We have to capture and at least identify those that were in the vicinity and involved as early as possible. Otherwise, we risk losing an opportunity to speak to that individual and capturing useful information. So if we break that down just briefly into the 3 steps, scene recording. Well, again, for those of you that have actually gone through specific COMET training, you will be familiar with this. We talk about the evaluation of any recording or CCTV that you may have had. I appreciate that, a lot of sites and locations don't have that. Often they're there for security purposes. Often they're there to monitor specific equipment or operations, at a location. But don't just think about it in the context of, was the incident itself captured? Also think about simultaneous operations. Could anything else? So what else was going on at the same time? Think about it in the context of environmental issues or housekeeping. What about in the the immediate aftermath of the incident? What about in the lead up or the planning or even the days prior? If that work or activity has taken place at the same location, it's regular and it happens often, then does the CCTV capture what's happened in the past? So if you hit a barrier where CCTV hasn't actually captured the event that you're dealing with, well, think a little bit outside the box. What else might it have captured that might well be useful to your investigation as well? Okay, and that might be, as I said, the lead up, so the history, but also that kind of SIMOPS and the kind of general culture, housekeeping behaviors that you're seeing going on as well. Of course, safely, but you know, the capture of photographs. So again, how do we go about that? Do we have the right equipment available to go about it? So how prepared are we? I guess a lot of this, folks, actually is about preparedness to do a good quality investigation. How ready are we? Capturing of similarly, but capturing reconstruction, but again safely, of video. So again, the movements that individuals have taken from point A to point B to point C, what were their perspectives, what could they see, what couldn't they see, being able to plot people's movements, etc. So again, what you're doing here as an investigator, of course, is trying to bring this back to life. You try to put yourself in the shoes of those that were doing the work. So again, how can you actually do that safely? And again, this is all about scale, folks. If this is a low-level, minor COMET light event, you probably aren't going to go to all of these degrees of investigation effort. If it's something of kind of medium or higher potential, or you know, and that very real, you know, severe impact was potentially there or was there, then of course these are some of the lengths that you will hopefully go to as part of your investigation. So again, some things to think about. Preserving of physical evidence as well. So again, think about the integrity. So how safe is it? What are you taking possession of? So how are you actually going to label and capture that safely? This is a bit about you know, traceability, folks. So how do you actually, from the point of that piece of equipment or whatever physically you're taking possession of, why you're taking possession of it, who's got responsibility for it, where is it going, how's it going there, what happens once it gets there, how are you getting it back? Think about the kind of life cycle of that piece of equipment or whatever it is once you're taking possession of it. Okay, so let's not, very easy to lose things, misinterpret things, you know, mislabel things. So all of these things are really important to the outcomes, because if this is a critical piece of equipment or a component part that's to be reviewed or analyzed, that might take weeks or months to get the results back. So the integrity of how we capture and control that evidence is critical, I would say, to the outcomes of it as well. And again, do you have the right people for that? Are they trained to do that? I'm trying to give, you know, I'm trying to give you kind of these pointers and stir some thoughts. Maybe things you have thought about, maybe things you haven't. Finally here, initial accounts. As I've said, as soon as is reasonably possible to respond and react and capture this information is critical. Witnesses will always be one of your biggest challenges in an investigation for some reasons that we'll touch on in a minute or two, but they will equally be, if you get that right, the source of really useful, invaluable evidence as part of your investigation. So the quicker that you can capture that data from them, the better. Initial accounts we're talking about here, I'm not talking about full-blown witness interviews. I'm talking about an initial account to initially capture what happened. Brief and concise, focus on the events that day. And this fourth point might be a little bit controversial. Initial accounts to be taken by the investigator, not compiled by the witness. I would imagine most organizations here have a policy in place where there's a pro forma statement, there's maybe a few questions, and the witness will capture their own information and give you the answers. Well, how accurate is that? How valid is that? How reliable is that? Initial accounts, particularly for more significant events, where possible, if the investigator can lead that, it gives you a far better early understanding of what happened. And if you have to then return to that witness to perform a more structured, detailed interview, you know, a day later or whatever it might look like, then okay, that's down to your investigation plan. But initial accounts are critical to understanding the circumstances and to make sure that you don't go off path. So don't rely on the witness giving you that information off their own back. Go out and capture that information, and where possible, have trained people that can at least go through a structured process of doing it. You might not get all of the answers, but an 80% outcome is a lot better than a 40% outcome, which is probably what you get if you leave it down to the witness entirely. So initial accounts, as soon as possible, keep them brief and concise initially. You know, focus on the events that day or surrounding the incident, but lead the process yourself if possible. Don't leave it just down to the witness. Maybe a little bit controversial, but definitely important. Again, some things to consider from an investigation, particularly a leadership standpoint. We might have to utilize, of course, delegation. So making sure that people within the team, you know, fully know their tasks and responsibilities and what their role is within the investigation team. As I've said, prioritizing that physical evidence and initial witness accounts capture that we've just touched on, and making sure we've got the time and resource available within the team. And also from a leadership perspective, be available. Let's make sure that people know questions, concerns, whether it's investigation team members, whether it's people that have been interviewed as part of the process, that they can actually come and talk to you about it as well. So be available as much as you can. When it comes to actual witnesses and speaking with those involved, we do actually categorize 4 different witness types, and all of these can help you during the course of an investigation. So ultimately, anyone who can help you understand the sequence of events that led up to, at the point in time or immediately after the incident, of course, are going to be useful. They might be subject matter experts, they might be external independent expert witnesses, they might be more organizational management dependent witnesses, but more often than not, probably 70-80% of the time, your most critical witnesses, particularly in the immediate aftermath, are going to be those direct witnesses, okay? Those that were involved, that can firsthand give you that information. These are the people that you've got to try and identify as early as possible. Now, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that that witnesses can, whilst they can also be of huge value to your investigation in terms of what they can offer because of what they know, they can also be a real challenge. So we have what we call here the witness axis, and your witness can typically sit at any point during an investigation, or more likely during an interview, they can sit in one of these 4 quadrants. So they might be willing and able to help you, which is great. So they've got the information and they're willing to share it. That's fantastic. They might be able to help you, which means they've got the knowledge, but are they unwilling to help you? Why might a witness be unwilling to help you? Well, the answers are probably pretty obvious. You can come up with those yourselves, but for reasons of fear of discipline or reprisal, protecting themselves, protecting their colleagues, they might share some of the truth, but not the whole truth. So again, probably quite a common area to be in. Less concerned about the witnesses that are unable but willing, unable, unwilling. They can become time-consuming for no real value. So let's try and make sure that we're identifying the right witnesses that can help us. But if you've got a witness who's in that kind of unwilling camp, difficult to deal with, challenging, you've got to think about how you're going to, without, making false promises. And remember what we spoke about earlier on, about being ethical and about being genuine and honest. How do you deal with that challenge of keeping your witness, as willing to help you as much as possible? Well, that really comes down to your ability as an interviewer. So your ability to gain trust, build a relationship, build rapport with that witness, as well as making sure that they can answer your questions. So making sure the questions are right and they're tailored for the witness as well. So that's about your planning. So success, folks, in an interview, success in dealing with an important witness, largely will come down to 2 factors: how well you've prepared and how well you've managed to gain or build a relationship and gain trust with that witness. If you're able to achieve both of those things, then the chances are you will capture really useful information from that interview. If you fail in either or both of those factors, so you don't prepare well, which means you don't know what questions you need to be asking, you haven't built a good rapport with a witness, there's a little bit hostile, you're not ever going to be able to kind of get the information from that witness. They will not feel comfortable to open up necessarily. So as ethically as possible, plan and build a relationship. If you plan properly, you can ask the right questions. If you build that relationship and you take time and you invest time in that rapport building, you give yourself a much better chance of having a willing witness. So it's what you ask and it's how you ask it. Ultimately, gives you the best chance of success. But there's not a silver bullet when it comes to this. There's no silver bullet in dealing with challenging witnesses and people. You have to remain, professional at all times. But think about your planning and think about the rapport building, and that will at least give you a solid chance of having a successful interview. And as we get close to wrapping this one up, again, for those of you that have been trained in COMET, you will know hopefully all about the PRISM model. For those of you that this is a little bit new to, this just gives you a really useful structure to conduct a witness interview. I've already mentioned the first 2. So plan, so think about what you want to ask, where you're going to do it, who's best to lead the interview. Okay, so what do you actually need to be asking the witness and what's the best way to do it? And that goes hand in hand with effective rapport building. If you build trust and gain a relationship with the witness, then you've really got a good chance for success. From there, we want to gather information through the use of open questions. So again, let's not jump into the detail. Let's just start easy. Let's get the witness talking. Open questions. Tell me, explain, describe in your own words. It's called first free recall. You get the witness talking as much as possible. And then from there, you can then start to summarize and confirm key points with closed questions. There's a misconception in investigations and interviews that closed questions are bad. Absolute nonsense. Try having a conversation with a colleague or a friend or somebody where you only ask open questions. It's impossible. Sometimes you just have to get to the point. You've got to clarify something. So you do that through closed questions to confirm facts, to challenge inconsistencies or things you're not quite sure about, and to make sure that you establish and you've captured all of the right information. So a good interview is a combination of open questions and closed questions. And if you get that planning and rapport building right, then you really are on a winner. If you don't get that right, you're going to struggle to get the information that you're looking for. And finally, and a piece that people always seem to forget, the importance of what you do with that information. So you've invested time, you've spent an hour with a witness, you've captured some really useful insights into what happened on the day. What do you do with that information? Well, how does it inform the investigation? What does it verify things we already know? Has it introduced new pieces of information we've now got to go and follow up on, or introduce? But ultimately, this information has informed the investigation. So how do you take that forward? And of course, you may also need to go back and speak to that witness. So the more professional you've been, the more courteous you've been, and you've made that witness feel, valuable, even if they have made mistakes and issues, and you might be just sitting there thinking, what on earth was this guy thinking about? You do it in such a professional way that does not come across. And of course, that gives you a best chance of a successful interview, which of course leads on to your bigger investigation and outcomes. And that's really, really important. So just as every investigation counts for your big picture in your organization, every witness interview counts when it comes to the outcomes of your actual investigation itself. So hopefully some useful points within there to consider. And just to close that up, just to kind of tidy it all up into one place, some final things to make sure not forget about. Let's not forget about the importance of documentation review. So those policies and procedures, instructions, guidance, activity-specific documents like risk assessments, toolbox talks, for example, the training and competence of those involved, anything regulatory or industry advisable, and of course, anything equipment related as well, but manufacturer spec. And specifically with equipment, because most cases probably involve equipment, think about the failure, background, success history of that piece of equipment. Has it failed before? Think about the human-machine interface. How effectively is it designed and ease of use, maintenance background, any modifications or design issues, and indeed things like storage and transport as well. These are all really important things to think about to sort of tidy up and close out to make sure you don't miss anything as part of your investigation. And finally, my very last point, for those of you that are COMET customers that are using the COMET investigation app, you have a tool called the COMET Expert Extensions, which provides you a consistent set of guidelines and framework and essentially a checklist that allows you to go through all of these steps that we've just introduced every single time to make sure that you don't miss anything. So again, the use of the front end extension tools makes all of this, it keeps it all in one place, it keeps it consistent, and it makes sure that every single time you go through the same habits and you have the right approach to your investigations. So for those of you that are in the tool, if you don't think you know how to access this, let me know and I will make sure you've got access to it. It comes with your package, so make sure and use the benefits of that as well. Thanks very much, folks. I've crammed that into the full hour. Hopefully it wasn't too quick for you. Hopefully you found that useful, and even one or two takeaways would be great. You know who I am now. If you want any more information at all, then just simply reach out. Other than that, I thank you again for your efforts and participation today. And I wish you happy holidays when they come around in the next couple of weeks. All the best, folks.